Wolcen Lords of Mayhem is an excellent new aRPG, and do you know how long it's been since I've been able to say that sentence? This is a genre that I grew up on and that dominated the PC landscape for over a decade. Diablo, Diablo 2, Titan Quest, Sacred, Torchlight, Dungeon Siege. Inspired by the success of Diablo, this genre thrived with a host of titles that often maintained an above average level of quality. The wheels really came off in 2012 with the disastrous launch of Diablo 3. Now, I don't know how many of you were around for that, but that was a seriously garbage tier launch, plagued by not only paralyzing technical issues, but just Diablo 3 just sucked. Its campaign was forgettable, it had no endgame whatsoever, the loot system was atrocious, and the entire game felt built around the real money auction house. The Reaper of Souls update turned the game around, and subsequent patching would go on to make it even better, but as far as release products go, Diablo 3 was a real turd. After that, there was a notable downturn in the number of aRPGs being released. Path of Exile hit in 2012, and would go on to become the new de facto mainstay of the genre, despite being an always online offering. Grim Dawn hit in 2016 and found critical acclaim as both a great game and an offline counterpart to Path of Exile. After that, we had Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr, and that was a very flawed title. And then there was that Chaosbane, like Warhammer Chaosbane game, and that was just terrible. It was so one-dimensional, so soulless. It kind of felt more like a mobile game than a proper PC release. It's been at least 4 years since the last great aRPG was released, but here we are. Wolcen Lords of Mayhem is finally out of early access, and after putting some 50 hours into it, I'm here to tell you that this shit is legit. This is a properly good aRPG. I love it. I think it's great, and I would very strongly recommend it to anyone who enjoys aRPGs. I will say though that this recommendation comes with a lot of caveats. There are a host of problems with this game. Some of them are minor, like small technical details. Some of them are mildly disruptive, like loot not being clearly labeled when it drops, so you don't know if you should pick it up or not. Some of them mess with the core flow of the game, like the current left click to move control scheme, or the sensation of input delay that's just all too common, even when playing on extremely low ping. This thing is coming in real hot. There are dozens and dozens of issues here that hold this thing back, and I'm going to spell all those out for you right here so you know what you're getting yourself into. The good news is that none of these issues dampened my love and enthusiasm for what I feel is a superbly built aRPG that breaks an all too long content drought. Wolcen Lords of Mayhem emerges from early access as one of the few great success stories, and in this review, I'm going to show you why. Wolcen begins by showcasing some of its strongest assets, its visuals and its presentation. The game runs on CryEngine, and it takes all of 2 seconds of watching Wolcen in action to realize that this is the best looking aRPG on the market today. The only thing that comes close to it is Path of Exile 2, due out later this year, but it's too early to comment on the full reach of its visual palette since we've only seen small segments of gameplay. Either way, Wolcen is a tour de force of visual splendor, the likes of which aRPG fans have never seen before. Its most impressive visual quality is its world design. The scrolling backdrops provide a sense of scale that we rarely see in aRPGs. The capital city feels underutilized because it's just so beautiful that you wish you had more reason to explore beyond the town center. One environment sees the path carved into piles and piles of corpses, the other suspended atop mighty elemental machinery, the other a demon-infested Gothic cathedral. It's fair to say that overall, Wolcen's environment design feels a little familiar and tropey, but no effort was spared to render each of these spaces in the most detail you've ever seen. You've walked through demonic halls countless times before, but chances are you've never seen them look this good. The lighting deserves special mention. There was a quote from someone recently, I forget who it was, but they said that lighting is the true next-gen frontier. We've already seen it with RTX and how much it changes our games. Wolcen doesn't have RTX, but it does have some pretty incredible lighting. What you'll notice is that there are a number of areas that are reused, but they change the lighting in each of these spaces and they become radically different levels. It's a neat trick to economize on level design, but I don't feel remotely ripped off by it because the lighting changes are so stark that I feel as though I'm in a completely different space. The quality extends to the particle effects that form the backbone of the combat feedback. There's so much visual information being presented to you here at every second, and with a few tiny exceptions, all of it is clear and looks beautiful. There have been concerns throughout development about optimization and performance. I'm playing on an RTX 2080 Ti, and all I can say is that at max settings, I'm getting solid performance like 98% of the time. When the action really heats up, I do notice some stuttering and some micro freezing here and there. The game also crashes every single time I alt tab, and since I accidentally did that several times while playing, since you spent a lot of time holding down the alt key, this was extremely annoying. Overall, I'm impressed by the optimization on display here, and I expect that most people should have a good experience after the alt tabbing issue is patched.
What's going on? Wait, listen.
Something is approaching.
Wolcen's cutscenes are the moments where every bit of the game's visual strengths combine to create impressive spectacle. The detailed character models, the lighting, the environment design, it's all dialed up to 11, supported by some strong cinematic direction. Wolcen's story isn't great, but the cutscenes are a joy to watch. It's kind of like pro wrestling. The dialogue is dumb and easy to ignore, but watching the action happen is enjoyable no matter how cynical the observer. To sum it up, I've never seen cutscenes in an aRPG look this good. Some of you out there might be asking if Wolcen is worth playing as a single player experience just to play the campaign and then put it down. To these people, I'd say no. Wolcen does have offline play, but note that your offline character is completely separate from your online character. The game does have a single player campaign comprised of 3 acts with plenty of story beats that will take you a good 20 or so hours to work through. Despite some excellent voice acting, the story just isn't really worth your time, and it isn't until the endgame that the game's systems and build diversity open up to you. In fact, I'd say that I was kind of lukewarm on Wolcen as I was playing through the campaign, and was kind of ready to give it a pretty lukewarm review when I was done. But it was when I reached the end game and I saw, all of the build diversity that was available, and I saw just how satisfying combat was when it all sort of clicked together, that really sort of like flipped a switch for me, and I'm like, hang on a second, this is excellent. This isn't like Destiny or Warframe or Borderlands, where a lot of the fun can be had in those campaign hours. This is a slow burn, a late bloom, and if you aren't interested in working your way through the end game, then I think Wolcen is a pretty safe skip. For those of you who are up for the grind, let's talk about how build diversity and character customization works. Wolcen begins in character creation. The customization tools on offer are simple, but they're at least something. As usual, I use my standard game journalist blue hair opener, and off I went. At this point, you might expect that you'd be selecting a class, but this is where Wolcen departs from the standard aRPG template. At the start of the game, you'll be asked which weapon you'd like to start with, but that's just a starter weapon, and after that, you're free to do absolutely anything you like. There are no classes in Wolcen. Every character can wield every weapon, use every every ability and put points into every passive in the expansive passive tree. As you play, you'll level up to a max level of 90. Each time you level, you'll gain 10 stat points to be distributed between 4 core stats, as well as 1 passive skill tree point. The stat points don't work quite like you'd imagine. Each of them has their own unique utility that make them equally attractive. If you're building an archer, you may feel obliged to put all of your points into agility, but this won't give you the maximum damage that you're hoping for. Far better to spread your points out across different stats, such as ferocity for more critical strike, or if you're going for elemental damage and status effects, putting points into wisdom. The passive tree is where things get really crazy. It's a 3-tiered ring that gives you general guidance through the coloring of the nodes. Green for range combat, red for melee, purple for spells. Only that's a really terrible way to describe it because the majority of the more powerful nodes provide broader utility that benefits every type of damage your character can dish out. Each cluster within the ring has around 3 of these major nodes, and you can rotate the ring to allow for what is an almost infinite combination of passive builds. We'll come back to that though, because to understand it, you really need to know how weapons and skills work in Wolcen. Remember how I said there were no classes in Wolcen? That's true. So the thing that most determines your playstyle is the weapon you equip. There are melee weapons, one-handers and two-handers. There are your caster weapons like staves and catalysts, and then there's your rogue weapons like bows, pistols, and daggers. The weapon that you're using determines which skills you can use. There are around 30 skills in the game divided up by weapon type. So if I'm using an axe, I can use melee skills, and if I'm using a bow, I can use range skills, etc. The thing is, I can mix and match any one-handed weapon in the game. So I can use 2 pistols if I want to dual wield for a straight range build, or I can use a pistol and a sword, which now gives me full access to any ranged ability and any melee ability. I can use a one-handed axe and a catalyst to open up a melee caster hybrid build. Whatever combo I want to run, I can do it. This dovetails neatly into the unique resource management system that Wolcen employs. See down the bottom here, this purple bar and this yellow bar kind of pulling back and forward on one another. This is my willpower and my rage. Willpower is used to power spells, while rage is used to power melee and ranged abilities. If I'm running a straight ranged build, I'm going to be generating rage when I shoot stuff and spending it when I'm using my abilities. I won't need to worry about willpower at all. However, if I'm running a hybrid build, I'm constantly switching back and forward between spells and abilities because spending rage helps me recover willpower and spending willpower helps me recover rage. This is genius, and it's like the game is encouraging you to move away from the more stodgy, linear builds we've experienced in dozens of games before. Skills, by the way, they feel so fantastic. Like this hammer throw thing where I throw out these dual hammers, and when I reactivate the ability, it recalls them like Thor. It looks awesome, it sounds so satisfying, and it has a high skill ceiling associated with it, allowing for actual player expression. The turret, for example, can be dropped on the ground, or I can hold the ability to pick up the turret myself and fire it. The rogue abilities let me dash in and knife someone quickly before being able to teleport backwards, leaving a bomb in my wake. This is all combined with an optional auto dash when you melee targets, as well as a dodge roll bound to the spacebar with a generous number of charges. This is a really key point for why I love this game so much. Combat in this game is not just standing there and spamming your abilities. It brings the action to the aRPG moniker. It feels fast and fluid and interesting. It has skills that require actual skill to use. It has a movement system that allows you to take the initiative or defensively react. It happens at a quick, satisfying pace, but at the same time, it isn't so fast that you just run through levels immediately melting shit. Combat in Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem is fun, actiony, skills-based combat, and that is not an easy formula to nail. The developers have done it here. In terms of skill customizations, they have an extensive tree baked into them that will take you a long while to unlock all of the things, and it can radically transform each ability. Using the turret again as an example, you can spec it for bonus damage, bonus chance to proc status effects, you can change its damage type, you can make it a supercharged double turret, you can drop 2 turrets, you can give it tracking so it can now follow enemies, you can put a shield up in front of it so it can block projectiles, and heaps of other shit. This is just one ability, and there are over 30 abilities, and they each have this level of customization. It's exactly what you'd want from a game like this. The stat game as well is deep and rich and complex and great. The principal downfall of Warhammer Chaos Bane was that it was just so simplified. It had no depth to its stats. Wolcen has a huge stat sheet with tons of different stuff to put points into, and none of it is fluff, none of it is useless. There's like 20 to 30 stats to play with, and each of them are powerful depending on the build you're assembling. On the critical issue of itemization, it's here where I think we're off to a good start, but there's still a lot of potential to be explored. I haven't encountered any gear sets after 50 hours of play, so I don't think they're in the game, but I could be wrong, they could come later. I've definitely encountered some unique game-changing weapons, stuff that has unique affixes that radically transform your build. I found a set of pistols that provide bonus pierce on all of my attacks, so without having to spec into it, all of my attacks now went through multiple targets, providing me an immediate and massive damage boost, as well as allowing me to reconfigure some of my passive allocations since I didn't need pierce passives anymore. I found weapons that provided huge bonuses to specific elemental damage types, allowing me to design entirely new builds around that one weapon, and this is what you want. You want skills and stats and passives and itemizations that are each individually so potent that players can hang entire builds off just one of these choices. Wolcen has that in spades. I feel like the best way to bring this home is a worked example to demonstrate just how much flexibility is baked into every part of Wolcen. I played my game as a pure ranger the whole way through, bows and pistols and nothing else. Eventually, I moved to the outer reaches of the ring and I decided on the white arrow segment, which provided a bonus to frost damage as well as benefits when enemies were slowed or immobilized. I sought out gear that gave me bonus to frost damage, I chose skills that let me convert their damage to frost, and I spec'd each of them for bonus chance to proc frozen status. By the end, I had a CC focus build that made it basically impossible for enemies to reach me, and I absolutely loved it. But then I was like, why don't I try something else? So I did. I didn't need to re-roll a new character to do this. I just respec my skills and my passives. I put on some new abilities and some new gear. The build was centered entirely around this one weapon, a lightning-based two-handed sword. What was really special about this weapon was that it let me use any lightning spell in the game. So my turret, for example, I can't use turrets when I'm using a two-handed sword because turrets are locked to ranged weapons like bows and pistols. But because the turret has one specific node that lets me convert its damage to lightning, I can now use this ability in this build. Same thing with this fireball spell. I can only use this when I'm using caster weapons, but because it has a node that lets me convert its damage to lightning, I can use it as well. So now I have a melee build using both ranged and caster abilities that would have been otherwise not available to me without this weapon. I completely redid my passive tree and I found a specific segment that buffs lightning damage and gives me a new resource to spend when using lightning spells. With all of this at work, I felt like I was breaking all of the rules at once to create something that is uniquely mine, and I absolutely love that. That is the core DNA of the aRPG genre, and Wolcen just nailed it. The very last thing I'll say about customization is the game has an excellent transmog and tinting system in place. Picking up any item unlocks it in the transmog menu, allowing you to apply its visual properties to any other item, and there aren't any restrictions. So if you want to wear sorcerer gear but look like an armored knight, you can do that. Dyes are unlocked by collecting them as you play. There are no microtransactions in the game at this point, but the developer has said they plan to implement them in the future with a cash shop selling cosmetics only. They claim they will never do pay to win in the future, but we've all heard that once too many times before. I'm not saying they're lying, I'm just saying we definitely can't take that as gospel in 2020. Either way, the game will launch without microtransactions. So look, to sum it up here, combat in Wolcen is fast, but it's not too fast. It's full of interesting skills that are well designed, fun to use, and sound great. Many of the skills have a high skill ceiling. There's a dodge roll and an automated dash built in, prompting a versatile playstyle no matter which loadout you're running. The stat system is deep, complex, and rewarding. Itemization is basic at this point, but the unique weapons I've encountered show great promise for the future. The hybrid approach to class design, coupled with a flexible skill point framework and a really interesting passive tree, give me complete freedom to build my character however I like, and I've already seen dozens of potential builds that all look as viable as they do fun. In short, it's
pretty good.
I mentioned earlier that Wolcen is a game that only hits its stride at the endgame, so let's talk about how that works. The campaign is going to run you about 20 hours, maybe 15 if you speed run through it. It's 3 acts, it's chunky, it's solid enough, but as I said, it won't blow you away. You'll be about level 40 when you finish. At this point, you're dropped back into town to commence a new game mode, similar to adventure mode in Diablo 3. You're not doing the story here, you're doing specific missions that teleport you to a random location with a random objective. You can do a basic mission, or you can do what's called an expedition, which allows you to pile on additional modifiers for bonus gold and item find. When you finish the level, you're offered the choice to either exit or continue deeper. Continuing deeper is how you unlock the higher starter levels in this mode, so it creates a long tail progression path for you. There are also additional mission types that you can unlock later on, but to be honest, I'm not up to them yet because I haven't built the required structures. And this brings us to the other major progression path in Wolcen, which is the rebuilding of Stormfall City. The pretense is that since triumphing in the campaign, you're now in charge of the city and have to aid in its rebuilding. Utilizing this overview, you can queue up building projects which will unlock new bonuses for you, like a permanent magic find boost, etc. You can also unlock new endgame systems, like the ability to break down items in the hope that you might get something better, or the ability to improve the rarity of items. Completing these constructions requires resources like gold, but it also requires productivity, which is a resource that's accumulated whenever you complete missions or expeditions. Higher level content and more modifiers provide more productivity, allowing you to complete constructions faster. It's easy to look at this menu and be a little underwhelmed by it. I can smell the time and budget constraints that led to this menu being used, instead of a more elaborate interface or an actual city full of actual buildings that appear as you build them. But look, this is a Kickstarter game, a team of 40 people. They made a great game, and this is just one of the things that came in with a little less visual flair than I'm sure they would have liked. I expect that over the coming months and years, this will be converted to something more impressive, but for now, it does the job of giving players a progression path beyond the end of the campaign, or just hitting max level. But it is a grind. The material grind and time requirements are considerable here. 50 hours in, and I'm nowhere near completing all of the building projects. I expect it will be another 50 hours plus to do all of the building. So if that sort of grind doesn't interest you, then Wolcen isn't for you. Personally, I'm glad that it exists in the way that it does. I like that Wolcen isn't afraid to make you work for endgame treats. Again, Chaos Bane was over in like 20 hours. Here, with the endless build diversity, with the intelligent mission system, and with the demanding construction grind, there's no way you are done with Wolcen inside of 100 hours, and that's just the basics. Perfecting dozens of unique builds will take as many hundreds of hours as you have spare. At the start of this review, I mentioned that there are quite a few caveats to my recommending Wolcen to you. I've mentioned some of them already in passing, but I want to give you the full complete list here and now so you know exactly what to expect if and when you choose to buy Wolcen. Firstly, this game is super buggy in its current form. I was playing the review build and a day one patch was promised that would kind of fix all the stuff. To be honest though, the number of bugs were so numerous that there is no way they could all be fixed before launch. Alt-tabbing crashes the game, audio was constantly bugging out and dampening for no reason, cutscenes were super buggy with T-pose animations and missing sound effects. I noticed a lot of placeholder text throughout the game. It takes a long time for levels to stabilize after you load in, with the first like 60 to 90 seconds being very heavy on lag and stutter. Sometimes there are literally not enough enemies in the level to complete the objective, so you just have to quit the level and lose potentially 30 or 40 minutes worth of progress. So yes, there are a lot of problems here. None of them ruined my game because I was enjoying it so much, but they were certainly a headache, so buyer be warned on this one. Expect Wolcen to come in hot and land with a little bit of a thud. There's also some pretty massive quality of life stuff missing that holds things back. UI is the biggest one, particularly the rage and willpower meter. Given how dependent you are on it, having to constantly look off screen to see it is not great. It really needs to be on the character somehow. I know this sounds like a small thing, but trust me, when you're playing, it seriously impacts your efficiency. Also, gear dropping without proper labels. Sounds small, but it's actually huge. I might be chasing bruiser gear, but I can't tell from an item label on the floor if what dropped is bruiser gear. It just says pants, so I need to pick up everything and then manually drop it if it isn't for me. When you start doing endgame runs and the amount of loot that's dropping is huge, having to do this over and over and over again really slows things down needlessly. The most critical issues, however, are movement and input delay. Movement is bound to left click, but guess what? So is your attack, and you can't change that. You can hold down left control to force movement, but remembering to do this when you're surrounded by scores of enemies is not easy. You'll probably just click on some random enemy and get KO'd by the swarm. Allowing you to rebind the movement key would have been an easy fix for this, but alas, there is no option to do so. The thing I hated the most though was the sensation of lag or input delay when playing. Now I played this game on Oceanic servers, so my ping was always super low, like 10 ms maybe. So many times though, I would just get this feeling where my inputs just weren't registering, like there was a stickiness to my controls or something. I went back and I read the known issues review guide, and there it was in black and white. Sometimes game will feel laggy even if you have low ping. This really sucks, and I don't imagine it's an easy fix for the developer. These sorts of things are often hard baked into the engine, the netcode, the animations, all sorts of stuff. I think this will be a problem at launch, so be ready for that. Given how fast, fluid, and rewarding combat typically feels, the moments when it breaks down feels particularly jarring. Okay, so let's start wrapping this thing up. I think I'd be remiss if at least some of this review didn't talk about the origins of Wolcen, since I'm sure there are going to be a lot of comments calling out the game and the developers for its broken promises. Wolcen Lords of Mayhem wasn't always called Wolcen. Back in 2015 it was called Umbra, and it was a Kickstarter that managed to pull in around $500,000. Its pitch was radically different to how the final game would turn out. It promised a fully open world. This would later be scaled back to Diablo hub things like Diablo. It promised detailed weapon crafting and customization. This would later be cut entirely. It promised player housing, also cut. It promised a dungeon creator tool, also cut. It promised unique character mutations based on how you played, and these mutations would grant you active or passive bonuses, plus they'd go into creating a unique apocalyptic form, which was like popping an ultimate ability. The mutations would be cut, but the apocalyptic form remains, albeit quite different to what was described. I've been watching Wolcen for a long time now, and the reason that it caught my eye was because of these lofty promises. The aRPG genre has felt incredibly stale since, like, Diablo 2. I mean, it really feels like we've been playing variations of the same game for 20 years now. Wolcen felt like a genuine shot at moving into some new territory, and I was super down for that, and I know a lot of other people were as well. There's a huge portion of Wolcen backers who are mad about these broken promises, and to be honest, I get it. Backers paid for one thing, and they got something very different. I think those backers have every right to be bummed out about where this landed if they backed it for all those genre-expanding ideas. Had the final product of Wolcen been garbage, I'd probably be angry too. To see all that ambition forsaken, only to then arrive at a substandard product, doesn't leave much room for anything but anger. But the final result here is very impressive, and it makes this bitter pill somewhat easier to swallow. We didn't get a truly next-gen aRPG, but we got a very competent this-gen aRPG. And right about now, that's more than enough for me. This is an important distinction. I've seen many headlines describing Wolcen as a next-gen aRPG, but it isn't. It's a very strong rendition of what you have already played. This is going to disappoint and disinterest some of you, but if you're a genuine fan of aRPGs and you go into it with that mindset, you're going to find a lot to like. Bottom line, here's the deal. This game is $45 at launch and promises a minimum of 20 hours gameplay for the campaign, around 100 for those just wanting to unlock everything, and potentially hundreds more after that, depending on your appetite for build diversity. I've played and reviewed many loot games over the years, and I've always said that the fundamental litmus test for this genre is, do you give the player enough tools and choice to make the repetitiveness not only bearable but fun? Structurally, Wolcen is little different from Chaos Bane or Inquisitor or Diablo 3 at launch. Each of these games failed for different reasons, but the core failure, the shared failure, was that they didn't give enough meaningful build diversity and player expression. This is one of the reasons why Path of Exile is so beloved. The possibilities here are endless. They're not quite as expansive here in Wolcen, but they more than meet the required threshold. There are so many builds that I would like to create in Wolcen. I smile as I imagine how fun it would be to level a shield tank, a hybrid party buff bot, a straight sorcerer, a plague-bringing summoner, a dual-wielding rogue. I can see all of these builds in my mind's eye and the game systems before me. They're there, inviting me to dump the hundreds of hours required to experience them. And I feel like that time investment would actually be worth it, because what I see here is a developer who clearly understands the core DNA of aRPGs. They get it. Wolcen is already a terrific game, but I have little doubt that a year from now, 2 years from now, Wolcen will be an even better game because the developers have shown at launch what very few developers are able to demonstrate at launch: a true understanding of what makes loot games tick. I very much look forward to where the developers will take this next. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and a huge thank you to AMD for supplying me with an amazing computer that I use for all of my playing and editing and my general life stuff. Click on the link in the description below to check out AMD's stuff. They're crushing it at the moment. Thanks again, and see you next time. Bye-bye.